Daf Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph, 31a, in Yeshiva Samanavshi, our prize Talmud, Shabbatai Jacobson. Don't worry, it can be edited. For the right price. Okay, let's start the Mishnah. New Mishnah, Bezrat Hashem.
New page, right. Mevi'im etzim min hasadeh.
Mevi'im etzim. Another Mevi'im Mishnah. Okay.
So we can bring wood from a field. Konim. So min ha karfan. Karpaf. Or karpaf.
So first min hasadeh, then from the me chu mechu.
Is that a mem or it's a mem, huh?
No, sir.
Yeah, it's a samach. Nichnos.
Mechu
Nis. Or nes.
nas. What is that?
Nichnos. Okay, yes. Is to enter.
Well, that's to be nichnas.
So nichnas is probably a field or a...
You know why we call it a Beit HaKnesset? It's actually that's right, the Ramban, the Nachmanides at the end of this week's Parsha, one of the most famous Rambans, who says, gather in Shul to declare that Hashem is our creator. So that's why they talk about when we gather to do something, it's called a kenes. A kenes of Hisorus, a kenes for this, a kenes for that.
A meeting place.
Gathering.
Gathering.
Meeting is nifgash.
Right.
You even have, I think, a restaurant called the Mifgash. Okay, so you can gather...
You can gather wood from a field, from a...
Ha-michunas.
From a gathering or a pile.
The wood which is gathered up.
Right.
We don't know where that is. From
Min ha-karpa. The karpaf is like a car park, right?
Sounds a little bit like it, right? Car pave. It's more like a backyard.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did David Ben Moshe come in for the learning with you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Afilu min ha-mofazar.
Mifuzar is the opposite of michunas.
Yeah, and what gets it that when woman's hair go out of place, it's called mefuzar. So it's like spread out.
Right.
Yeah.
That seems strange. You gather from the gathered, and then even from the spread out.
Right.
Okay.
As a karpav or karpef, what is a karpef?
Eze who?
Eze who?
That's like we say in Simchas Torah. Mihu ze ve'eze who?
What is?
It.
What is it? What is this karpef? What is a karpef?
Which is this real, the karpef? Well, so what's the definition of karpef? The answer is...
Anything that's close to, everything that's close to a city.
Has to be an enclosed area, though, apparently. Or else why would that be different than any field that's next to the city? It's an enclosed area, right? Like fenced in.
Right.
But he's saying it has to be adjacent to the city. Okay, we'll see why that makes a difference. Hopefully Rosh will elucidate that. But that's only what? Rebbe. No, you just read red light.
Yossi Omer, Kol Shanich Nasim, Lo, Potachat. Sees that everyone who enters needs a key, basically. You need a key to get in. Afilu Patocha Tachum, Shabbos.
That would be what?
2,000 amos.
No, but he's saying that would be his definition of karpef.
Of a karpef, right? So a closed area, enclosed area.
So it seems like nobody really discussed that it's enclosed, but maybe that's what it means. If you need to open it with a key, that means it's enclosed. See, so Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need it to be enclosed, or even if it's open, as long as it's surrounded by a fence.
He says you need a key.
He says you need a key, but Rabbi Yehuda argues with that. It's possible.
He just says it needs to be close to the city.
Yeah. So is that, if all that Rabbi Yossi's arguing with is that it doesn't have to be close to the city, even far away from the city, then he doesn't have to talk about it being open with a key. Seems like it's a new definition. Okay, let's see according to Rashi what some of the issues are here. Let's start with the Rashi on the Mishnah. Mevin Eitzim.
Mevin Eitzim, the person brings wood.
He's allowed to bring the wood, and I suppose we're talking about Yom Tov here.
Hitlosim.
Telushim.
Telushim. What's Telushim?
Detached.
Minhasaveh. So detached from a tree?
It's the field.
Detached from, from me, I say there. Shebatoch Tachum B'Yontav.
So Rashi's already mentioning the Techum in the first Rashi, even though the Gemora, the Mishnah mentions at the end of the Mishnah. Rashi says the whole time, of course, you have to be talking about within the Techum, because there is such a thing as Techum Yom Tov. And obviously, even though we're allowed to go out into the field and carry it, because apparently that's mutter, but we don't have we have at least one limitation that it has to be within the Techum.
One place called it Techum Shabbos, the other place Techum Yom Tov. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's really the same thing, but I'm not sure why the Mishnah talks about Techum Shabbos as if it's different. Rashi's pointing out that first of all we're talking about Yom Tov, but even on Yom Tov there is such a thing as Techum. Whereas you might have thought that we're talking about Shabbos perhaps, but then obviously wood would be muksa on Shabbos, and the wood is not necessarily muksa on Yom Tov.
Right.
Okay, so the first thing that Rashi seems to be teaching us that is Telushim.
Right.
Rashi has to add that because you might have thought what? That you're not limited to detached wood. Maybe even if wood is still attached to the field or attached to the tree, you'd be allowed to chop it down, sounds like.
So this is detached to a tree, from a tree, obviously. Only detached from a field.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing. It's detached from the place where it grew. However it grew, it's detached. It's no longer growing. So when I come to take it, part of taking it doesn't entail chopping it down. Rashi, I think, is coming to just make sure that we understand that, because perhaps somebody would have thought that just like you're allowed to do other things for Ochel Nefesh, maybe this is one of the malachas you're allowed to do for Ochel Nefesh, to detach wood from the tree or from its source of growth. Rashi says no. That's not mutter. You're only allowed to take wood that's already been detached, and the only question is perhaps a question of muksa or whatever. And Rashi has to add that we're talking within the Tikkun, because the Mishnah only mentions it at the end when we're defining Karpef. And here we're talking about a Sadeh, which sounds like it's just an open field, seemingly anywhere, and we're saying no. Even this Sadeh that we're talking about here has to be within the Tikkun, because there is a halakha of Tikkun, and of course if it's outside the Tikkun, how are you ever going to get it home? Can't bring something from outside the Tikkun into the Tikkun. Okay. So that's the first halacha. We're allowed to bring in detached pieces of wood from a field that's within the Tikkun. So the only real question is, I suppose, muksa, or perhaps even at the beginning of the parak we talked about bringing things in a way that made it look like you're doing business, or made it look like you're doing something weekday. So perhaps that's also part of the issue of this, that you're allowed to do it and it doesn't look like people understand you're gathering the wood for cooking or some other Yom Tov activity, not a weekday activity. In any event, okay, so that's mutter from the Sadeh, and then even from the Mechunas, Rashi says,
Im kanasu ga'arev Yom Tov, if they enter.
If he entered it, or maybe it means he gathered it, perhaps even.
Yeah, from Erev Yom Tov, the gali or the galei yatei the aliyu.
Alayhu.
The ahar simuch. Ba'enu muktzah.
There he goes. Now finally Rashi mentions the inyan of muktzah.
So he says if he brings it in from the Erev Yom Tov, he reveals his intention basically. What does samuch mean?
Bringing it in would mean it's already in his backyard. What do you mean he bring it in? No, it's not nichnasu, that would be entered in. This is kinso. So this is the same verb as mechunas, to gather together. So he had gathered it together, piled it up or whatever, Erev Yom Tov. So he did some kind of an action to the wood on Erev Yom Tov.
Right. So he reveals his intention. And therefore it's not much. So what's the word samuch? Samich?
Sorry, just 1 second. Adjacent. Samuch means adjacent, just like samuch. It's the word samuch, just slightly different form. Okay.
So if he gathers the word from Erev Yom Tov, he reveals his intention to use it, and that's not muktzah. Aval mifzorim amfozorim
Mifuzarim.
muktzah muktzin. That if it's scattered, it's considered muktzah.
Okay, so Rashi's now revealing a little bit about the first part of the Rashi, that there he was talking about ones that were gathered together.
Right.
So if the wood was gathered together, the reason why that's better is because Rashi says what happened then
Shows his intention.
shows his intention, which we've seen all along, that that's the key in Hilchas Muksa. If we know your intention is to use it, that already, for the most part, takes it out of the category of Muksa. Seemingly even according to Rabbi Yehuda, and as it says in the Mishnah, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So we know we're talking even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds of Muksa, but as long as you did an action to prepare it, as it were, Rashi doesn't go that far as to say you actually prepared it, but he just says, by doing this action, you have actually revealed your mind that you intend to use it the next day. So that's actually here, the word samich is not adjacent as much as relying upon. I think Rashi is using it in the sense of lismoch, to lean upon something, to rely upon something. So that's what, I'm not sure why he needs that concept. It's not just enough to say he wants to use it, but he's going to actually rely upon it. It's a stronger word, really, like I'm relying on that, and therefore it's a much stronger type of an intention, actually. Okay, so Rashi says, if it's gathered up, and how did it get gathered up? You had to gather it. Whoever is going to be using it had to have gathered it to show that he wants to use it. And Rashi's wording is that he actually is going to be reliant upon it. So then it's not muksa. But Rashi said, if as opposed to gathered up, it's rather still spread out and hasn't done anything to gather it up, then it's muksa. So this would be a little bit like the straw that we saw earlier. We said it's a question about gathering up the straw, etc. Okay. One of the things I just want to point out here, then, he just made it clear that if it's mefuzar, it's asr.
Right.
And yet, if you read the Mishnah, you wouldn't necessarily know that, because it says the next line of the Mishnah says that from the mefuzar you could take a filamin of mefuzar. So I was tricked at that point in the Mishnah to thinking that you could actually use it even if it's spread out, even if it's scattered. But Rashi just made it clear that that's not true. So I think we have to reread the Mishnah now. Let's go back and reread the Mishnah according to this.
Okay. Nuvi'in eitzi min hasadeh min ha-michnos. So a person can bring wood from the field, from a gathered wood from the field. Umi ha-karpef, and from a yard, an enclosed yard, Filamin hamufuzar, and even from that which is spread out.
So in other words,
so where is it spread out? In the field, in the gathering, or?
See, that's what I think we weren't catching the first time around. This time, I think in order for these two statements to make sense together, you have to say, when are you allowed to take from the mefuzar? Only as it says, if it's mina karpef. Then we say you can somehow rely on it even if it's spread out, and you didn't do any act to prepare it, so to speak. But if it's from the sadeh, which is a more open area, which maybe even implies you don't really have shlita over that area, maybe you don't even own that area. I don't know who owns that field, but it's a field like an open field, more hefker, or more open, more wild, like a wilder area. Then you have to actually do an act to the wood to show that you intend to use it. Whereas if it's in an enclosure, a karpef is always an enclosure of some sort, then we don't require it to be gathered up beforehand. Even if it's still spread out, you can use it. So I think now we're more, I think, in tune to the distinction that the Mishnah is raising. That Rashi already explained it. If you gathered it up, you did an act to show that you want to use it. So that's almost like an overt preparation showing that you want to use it. So therefore, Rashi says it's not muksa, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, because we know we're talking about Rabbi Yehuda here. But then the big question would be, why then, when it's in a karpef, suddenly you don't need to do anything. You can just use it even if it's not mechunas, even if it hasn't been gathered, even if he didn't do any act to show his intention, seemingly. From the previous Rashi, it seems like that's the distinction. Mefuzar is you did no act to show your intention, and mechunas, you did an act to show your intention. So that would be, so seemingly, if you did an act to show your intention, then you can even take from an open field. But if you didn't do an act to show your intention, you can only take from an enclosed field. Well, why does that make a difference? If really you didn't do any act, then why can I take from this wood that hasn't been properly gathered together? So that's why we definitely need to see the next Rashi.
Sounds like the closed field is more a private thing.
It's like a private thing, either because it's an ownership question, so he owns it already. But from the previous Rashi, I would have thought that doesn't quite cut it, excuse for the pun, right? That you need to have something showing your intention. So I still don't, how do I know his intention if it's still spread out, even if he owns it?
That was Rashi before with the deer that was in behind the fence.
Yeah.
Remember? And,
yeah, but it just gets confusing because you have to know we're talking in Rabbi Yehuda at that point and Rabbi Shimon at that point. You have to remember, here we're digging into the Chiddush here, I think, more than anything else, is that we're talking Rabbi Yehuda, who normally needs a proper preparation for something that would normally be muksa to take it out of the category of muksa. So you're right, it is possible that it's connected to that sugya of the animal who was born, etc. But this would be the question. If he owns it, maybe that automatically means that we assume any wood that he owns, his mind is to use. Maybe that's like some new assumption. If it's in a field, it's not yet his, he has to show an action. If it's in an enclosure, it's his, then maybe it's assumed that he wants to use it. I don't know. Okay, let's see the next Rashi then. Why suddenly when it's from the carpet we can dispense with the requirement of his making some sort of an action?
Right. Bemin HaKarpef, Shahu Mish Amer.
Right. So there, Rashi right away puts his finger. Right. It's like it's a guarded enclosure. In other words, not that you have a guard standing there, but the very fact that there's an enclosure gives it some sort of a protection.
Mukaf.
And that
surrounds it. Yeah?
It's surrounded, all around. In other words, it is in a full enclosure, not just a partial enclosure.
And even if it's scattered.
Then, if it's in such an enclosure that's completely like guarded and surrounded, then even if it is spread out,
then it's according to his reasoning is mukta.
What?
Even if it's scattered.
I think it's here like almost a noun. The scattered wood. It's like almost like saying a field the mifuzarim shabo. Then even all the wood that which is spread out within it, which is scattered about within it. Lo hikta midaito. He did not push away from his mind. Right? That's the yesod of muksa. Rashi always uses that. The whole word muksa really stems from this idea that someone has pushed it away from their mind, from the usage in their mind, and that's seemingly what Rashi's saying is that the reason why this doesn't need preparation is because it's just the opposite. We don't have any reason to believe he pushed it away from his mind. When it's out there in the field, normally that's like away from a person, away from their mind. So then they have to do an act to show that their mind is on it. Here, nothing took it away from his mind. Then there's an assumption he never pushed it away from his mind. So perhaps it's like we said before, in a slightly different way, that since he owns it, we have to still assume there's some ownership here. Could be he owns both. That would be a question. The open field, could be he owns it as well. It's almost like the carpet, the muksa. Remember we talked about the rachva, the muksa, where it was stored way in the back of the house, and he hardly ever used. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that would be muksa, because it's oats like otzer, the idea of otzer, right? So maybe out in the field, it's even if he owns it, but it's almost like an otzer in the sense that it's far away from him, and his mind is pushed away, and it's out of bounds, as it were. Even though it's physically within the tichum, that's not the problem. But it's so far away, it's almost like that storage house in the back of the house that he hardly ever uses. So, in a way, maybe he's pushed it away from his mind, then he has to do an action to show that it's within his mind. But here, Rashi's saying, if it's within an enclosure that's, I guess, like he says, it's samuch l'ir, so it's very close by. So I guess the fact that it's enclosed and it's adjacent to where he lives, kind of gives it that. You're right. We had a similar thing with the animal. I think we had also the thing about it. It was nearby. Yeah. Then we assume his mind is on. If it's far away, not. Okay. So here, it's the enclosure and the close proximity. It leads us to believe he never pushed it away, meaning his mind always thought somehow to use this wood, even according to Rebbe Yehuda. That's the Chiddush. Okay, so therefore he doesn't have to do an action. Even mefuzar is still okay. Okay, and also samuch l'ir, he says that's what a karpef is. And Rashi says samuch l'ir mamish. Very interesting Rashi. Right? What does mamish mean?
Really.
Or literally. Right, it's better, I think, it's very interesting also because it says in this week's Parsha, by Makas Choshech, by Yomesh Choshech. And Rashi says it had mamashut, it had like substance. Right, mamash means there's like substance to it. So that's why I think it means like literally, like in the most substantial way, it's samuch, it's like adjacent. So I guess there's a kind of a samuch that it's not quite next to the ear, but it's certainly closer than a lot of the fields farther away. Rashi says that wouldn't be enough in this case. It has to be right up against the ear. Now, I don't know where in the ear he lives. Maybe he doesn't even have to live on that side of the city. To me, it always seemed like it was a backyard, or like back of his house. But to Rashi, it doesn't say necessarily it has to be samuch to his house, just samuch to the ear. And maybe that's why Rashi says mamish, because if it was his house, maybe it didn't have to be so close to his house, it's just a little bit close would be enough. But here, it's not necessarily close to his house, just close to the city where his house is in. Then we need it to be mamish, no differentiation between the edge of the end of the city and this carpet. It's like the first thing you hit when you leave the town is that carpet.
So what does he say about the word talush? Talushim?
I think Rashi's there just informing you that often when you read a Mishnah or anything else that you read, Rashi's worried about what the normal connotations of those words are. If I say you can bring wood, wood can be either detached wood or wood can be part of a tree still. Right? The truth is the word eitz can be also used to describe a tree itself. So I think Rashi's worried that if I just say bring wood, you can bring wood home, some people might think that means you can actually bring wood right off the tree and bring it home. So Rashi's saying, no, that's not what it means here. We're not really talking about the malacha of chopping down a tree being mutter here. No one's saying that's mutter, but rather only in the Hilchos Muksa, with this Mishnah is trying to distinguish between different pieces of wood that are either muksa or not muksa. We had a similar thing last time around where we said...
Again, it's a visual thing. I mean, if people see you coming from a field, right?
Yeah.
And they're more likely to think that you've chopped it down than if you come from an enclosed storage place next to the city. It's private. Oh, he's come from his storage, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Even if it's scattered, it's not going to bother them. But if you are going to be seen out in the field, it needs to be piled up. And they can see that...
it takes away the Marasayim.
Yeah.
Okay, I like your approach, but it's not Rashi's approach. Because Rashi is not mentioning anything other than muksa. He doesn't say anything which would hint to the fact that there's a Marasayim and we're trying to eliminate the Marasayim. It looks like you chopped it down. It didn't look like you chopped it down. Or any of the... Rashi does mention that it has to be already pre-chopped, so to speak, already detached from any source of growth. That's the only wood we're talking about. But Rashi doesn't say that the difference between wood from this place and wood from that place, if it's piled, if it's not piled, Rashi doesn't get into the fact as there were earlier Mishnayos that did deal with this, that it looks better, that there's less Marasayan, that it looks like you're doing something more Yom Tovdik. Rashi doesn't get into any of those things of how it looks. In this particular Mishnah, Rashi seems to be only focusing on his das. What do you think his mind has? How is his mind relating to this piece of wood? That's all I see in these Rashis, that if it's in this particular place, it has to have this quality for his mind to be attached to it, to allow you to take it. Whereas if it's all a muksa question, how much can we say his mind is on it? In different circumstances, basically, when do we assume his mind is on it based on the circumstances? It's all a muksa question, nothing more than a muksa question. It's a good point that you're raising, though, because we have had earlier in the parak even the major question of how do these things look to onlookers. I think we even had a case where you were bringing it from far away, and how did it look? There we talked about how many bundles or how many boxes and so on and so forth.
Behind you,
yeah.
that whole thing. Yeah.
So maybe we've already dealt with that issue, so maybe that's why that's not really an issue anymore. We've already said if you're going to carry, do it in a certain way that's not maybe so many, but then sometimes we let you, because then it was like, EF Shar, we let you, because then, we said in all the issues, we should always try to do it slightly differently than we normally do it. If that's not possible, because it's too much tircha, or too many trips, or whatever, then we allow you to do it the normal way. So it seems like we already dealt with that issue. Perhaps we're beyond that, therefore, even though we use the same kind of wording, we can't bring, and that kind of reminds us of the beginning of the parak, how we bring different objects from far away and to make sure it looks okay, even though it's the same kind of wording, but I think, as Rashi says, that's not the issue anymore, either because we've already dealt with it, or simply because, you see, the Mishnah is trying to give you the main differences between an enclosure and a non-enclosure. But you're right, one could have gone in a different direction than Rashi did. So you have to know if there's another reason why Rashi knew that we're talking about muksa. Perhaps the Gemora is going to discuss it, so Rashi often, knowing what which direction the Gemora will take, will explain the Mishnah based on that. But clearly Rashi's learning it only from a muksa point of view. Okay.
And this is a feeling mitoch Shabbos.
Okay, so this is the other opinion. Rabbi Yossi says, Kol shenichnasim lo beposachas. Anytime you have to enter with some kind of a, like you said, a key or something, what we would call a mafteach, then a filu besoch tchum Shabbos is permissible, seemingly. So we seem to be arguing with Rabbi Yehuda on some point, it's not clear which point. Maybe saying even from a field, maybe it doesn't even have to be enclosed. But if it's not enclosed, why are you using a key? If you're using a key, it seems like you have to, it's enclosed. So we already said if it's enclosed, then even Rabbi Yehuda lets you, if it's not, even if it's scattered.
So how come Rashi doesn't talk about that?
Well, we haven't yet seen the Rashi. Maybe we haven't seen the Rashi. I think we still haven't seen the Rashi. Let's just see. There's only one Rashi here. Afilu b'sof tchum Shabbos. B'sofo. Okay, now, according to Rashi, I would say this one-word Rashi is somehow talking to the previous one-word Rashi. Right? When Rashi was explaining Rabbi Yehuda's requirement that it be samuch le'ir, Rashi threw in a word. Mamish. So then I knew that Rabbi Yehuda is only going to let you be makel, let's say, to take scattered wood, only if that enclosure is very close to the city. The very first one that's next to the city, not anything farther away. Whereas Rashi seems to be saying now, with this new one-word Rashi, is that he's saying Rabbi Yossi is arguing. We know he's arguing. The way that the Mishnah is set up, it sounds like they're arguing. Rashi says, yeah, they are arguing. But you know what they're arguing in? That Rabbi Yehuda, when he let you take mefuzar from a karpef, it had to be samuch. And Rashi says that wasn't just a general samuch, that was samuch mamish. So you imagine the city is like here, it's only if it's right here. Whereas according to Rashi, the difference is that Rabbi Yossi is saying, as long as you go in there and there's some kind of a key or whatever that issue is all about, then even besoch techum Shabbos. Now we were already talking within the techum. The first Rashi made that clear. We never wanted to let you take from outside the techum. But Rabbi Yehuda said, if I'm going to let you take mefuzar, it's only if the enclosure is mamish samch, literally right next to the city. Whereas Rabbi Yossi saying, no, even if it's just within the techum. And Rashi says, well, we were always talking within the techum. No. Rashi says there's one more word I want to add over here. Besofo. This time we're saying, according to Rabbi Yossi, that it doesn't have to be samuch, mamish. It can be all the way at the end of the techum. That's what he means. They're both talking within the techum. But a techum is 2,000 amas, right? There's a lot of space there. So according to Rashi, that's the machlokes, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. When we're saying you can take mefuzah from a karpef, because a karpef is already an enclosure that you sort of assume that the guy wants to use, but Rabbi Yehuda says, I'm only assuming that if it's somewhat to the city. Those kind of enclosures, which are right next to the city, I assume the guy wants to use. So therefore I don't need him to pile it up to show me that he wants to use it. But if it's farther away, according to Rabbi Yehuda, even though it's in an enclosure, and even though it's within the techum, Rabbi Yehuda would say, if it's not mechunis, if it's mefuzar, you can't use it. Right? That's what, so far, Rabbi Yehuda has been made clear. The only time he'll let you use it is basically two major conditions. It has to be in a karpef, that's samuch to the city, and Rashi says samuch mamish. In other words, mamish right next to the city. Right. Whereas Rabbi Yossi is saying, no, as long as it's within an enclosure, that's all I care about. And of course, it has to be within the techum. But once it's within that techum, then even if it's farther away, even if it's mamish at the very end of the techum, Rashi says, then I'll still let you take from it, even if it's mefuzar.
But that's very personal. You need a key to get there.
Okay, the key issue,
so not
I'm not sure.
Can take it.
Huh?
Not anyone can take it.
Okay, you're putting in a good point. Maybe the karpef of Rabbi Yehuda didn't need a key, so it's a bit more, but Rashi still said it's considered guarded. Anything within there is a bit more guarded, and it's also, Rashi added another word, mukaf. Okay, that we knew was mukaf, but Rashi said it was guarded, right? Not necessarily guarded with a guard. Maybe he meant a guard, I don't know. But sometimes the word guarded just means because it's an enclosure that's protected within itself. From just the enclosure itself gives it a kind of protection. Or maybe Rashi even means there is a guard there. It doesn't. It's not clear, but he doesn't mention the actual guards. He just uses the word guarded, which could sometimes mean it's just enclosed. So maybe you're right. Maybe that's a big difference. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda would say, I don't care about whether you use a key or not. The main thing is that it has to be right next to the city to show that it's that you normally would use it. Okay, maybe it's a little bit like we had before. If it's this storage area way in back of the house where you hardly ever go, it's too far removed from your normal usage to really count on it, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So maybe he would say the same thing, even if I don't care if you lock it up, I don't care what you do, but if it's too far from the city, way at the end of the techum, I don't think that your mind is on it. I don't think you're really relying on going back there and getting it. Whereas Rabbi Yossi may hold like Rabbi Shimon for all we know. And he's saying, no, as long as, first of all, of course it has to be, a proper enclosure with a lock or something to make sure people aren't going to come in. So therefore, you know it's there. You have to walk a little bit extra to get it. Okay, I think your mind is still on it. That's what he seems to be saying. Sorry. Yes, Daniel. I'm giving a share. Can I call you back? I'm in the shear room next to the shul till about 5:20. Till about 5:20. Okay.
Right.
So Rashi is making it clear that perhaps you're right. Perhaps one of the distinctions is that Rabbi Yossi is only dealing with an enclosure that is properly locked and needs a proper key, whereas Rabbi Yehuda seems to say it doesn't matter to me. That part doesn't matter to me. The part that matters to me is where's the proximity to the city. If it's completely adjacent to the city, the first thing right next to the city, then it's fine. As long as there's an enclosure that's somewhat guarded, but it doesn't have to necessarily lock. Maybe that's true. But Rabbi Yossi is saying, as long as it locks, I can have it much farther away. The distance doesn't bother me, as long as it's within the Tehum, of course. But then I still assume that the fellow wants to come get it because he relies on it being there, seeing that it's locked up, like you said. Okay, so there's definitely a machlokes.
So there's actually quite a few factors here, whether it's close or far, whether it's scattered or carved, right? Whether it has a key.
Right. Well, I think the way to think about this Mishnah, first of all, is just to think of the first case as like a separate Mishnah almost. If it's gathered in a field, then it doesn't matter where it is, as long as it's within the Tehum. Everybody agrees on that. As Rashi said, because you have shown your intention of using it by gathering it up Erev Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov. Okay, so let's just take that out of the equation now. The rest of the Mishnah is discussing, but what if it's in an enclosure, which is somewhat guarded in and of itself? Could that bypass the need of my physically preparing it, my physically gathering it up and piling it up? Right? That's the next question. First point is, if you do something to actually prepare it, then nobody would argue that it's accessible on Yom Tov. It's not muksa. You've taken care of the muksa factor by doing a physical preparation of it, like we've seen all along. But the question will be where you didn't do any physical preparation, and now the only thing we can rely on to think that you want to use it is its proximity, or its enclosure, or whatever. So that's where we have a machlokus. So that's the main thing to focus on. Okay? So then the main machlokus, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, in this kind of a case, where it is in an enclosure, and they're only talking about where you didn't do a preparation, it's scattered, you didn't do a preparation, then the question is, the very fact that it's in an enclosure will mean that you intend to use it, and therefore it doesn't matter how far away it is, even as long as it's in the Tehum, or it needs to be adjacent to the city in order to assume you're going to use it. And the thing about using a key, we're not sure yet if that's the main factor according to Rabbi Yossi. It seems like it. He mentions it, so let's assume it is an important factor. If it is, then we just say, look, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the proximity to the city is the most important factor. And as long as it's in an enclosure that's close by, we'll let you use it even if you haven't done a preparation, even if it's still scattered. But Rabbi Yossi would say, no. To me, the proximity doesn't matter. Of course, it has to be within the Tehum. There's nothing to talk about. Of course, it has to be that. But once it's within the Tehum, can it be far away? Yes, as long as, again, it's within a car pave and it gets properly locked up. And he needs a key to open it. So we're assuming that's part of the equation, although I would wonder perhaps even if it doesn't get properly locked up, he would, as long as the very fact that it's in an enclosure is good enough for him. I'm not sure. Let's assume the key is an important factor. So it's almost like, if, according to your way of learning that the key is an important factor, then according to Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't need a key, but he needs proximity. According to Rabbi Yossi, he needs the key, but he doesn't need proximity. Either way, we need the very fact that it's in an enclosure isn't enough. We need something beyond that to give us an assurance that his mind was on it before Yom Tov. Either the proximity, according to Rabbi Yehuda, or the fact that it's properly locked up, under lock and key, as it were, according to Rabbi Yossi. In any event, okay, so that's the main machlokas, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. In an enclosure, when it's scattered, when can you then say the very fact that it's in an enclosure helps? One says only if that enclosure is extremely close to the city, and the other says even if it's farther away, as long as it gets locked up. That's what we'll assume right now. Okay, very good.
So we go to the Gemora now.
I think we can start the Gemora.
Gemora,
Mazel tov, it's beautiful. Okay.
Gemora Yehuda, Mashmul, Ein V'im Eitzim Eile Min Ha Michmosim. Sheba Karkaf. Okay, so according to Rabbi Yehuda.
Now this is not Rebbe Yehuda,
Right.
right? Like we had in the Mishnah. This is Rav Yehuda, who's an Amora, and he's not even saying it on his own. He's saying it just quoting Shmuel, who's an Amora.
How do we know that?
It says Rav Yehuda, whereas in the Mishnah it says Rebbe Yehuda. Right, the resh with an apostrophe.
Oh, I see. Rebbe Yehuda.
And besides, there's another way to know, because in the Mishnah, everyone knows it's Rebbe Yehuda.
One says Amar.
But after the Gemora, when the Gemora is speaking, it could be either. Sometimes the Gemora quotes Rebbe Yehuda the Tana, okay? But it says in the name of Shmuel. So there's only one person who's famous for quoting Shmuel, that's Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda was a famous Amora who was quite great in his own, but one of his biggest claim to fame was that he learned both from Shmuel and from Rav. So you have many statements of Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, and you have many statements of Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. In both cases, it's an Amora who happened to make it his business to learn from both Shmuel and Rav, which gives him a much greater circumference of opinions to choose from. In any event, so that's, okay, these are Amoraim, which makes sense. After we've had the Mishnah, we have now, it's like a commentary, but the truth is they're not qualifying the Mishnah, they're saying a new halacha. Now that halacha sounds a lot like the Mishnah, but when we actually examine it, it actually looks like they're arguing with the Mishnah. Let's think about it.
What are they saying?
Ein Mevinesing Ella would be translated properly as we can only bring
from the gathered wood in the car park, in the
enclosure.
In the enclosure.
Yeah, he doesn't say what kind of an enclosure, close to the city,
so
far away,
right.
This, that, and the other. He's leaving that out.
Gathered.
So that might be something to think about. But he is, on the surface, arguing with the Mishnah, which sounds preposterous, but obviously we're going to have to think about how this goes together with the Mishnah. Because in the Mishnah made it clear that the only time I need it to be gathered up is if it's in a open field. Because then all I have to rely on is the action that he takes to prepare it. But in an enclosure, we said, that's much more logical according to the Tanoim. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi both agree that once it's in an enclosure, you don't really need it to be gathered up. Just you need other factors, perhaps. So that would be my understanding before looking at the Rashi, that maybe that's what Shmuel is coming to say. That according to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, the way we just described it, on the one hand, you could say, look, they don't need it to be piled up. They let you take from Mifuzarim in the enclosure. But they have one other thing, that the only way they'll allow that is if it's either close or locked up. So it could be that's the key, so excuse the pun, to understanding this new statement of Shmuel, which would be, hey, we want to make a rule for everyone. People get confused, people, they can get mixed up. So we're going to make one rule, one simple rule for everything. Even from a carpet, we're going to be machmir to make sure it's piled up. Because otherwise, we always have to make sure, how close is it? Is it, like Rashi said, is it mamish close? Is it a bit farther? Like, how close is it? And according to Rabbi Yossi, is it under lock and key? Whatever. It gets complicated, right? So perhaps Shmuel was just saying, for the earlier generations, it was easier for them to get it straight and to make sure that if they're going to get from a carpet, they can take even mifuzarim, but they have to be these extra conditions according to each Tana. Maybe Shmuel felt that it's just a bit too hard for Klal Yisrael to get it straight, so he just made a general rule that will cover all exigencies. That basically we always have to have done preparation, which means we always have to have shown that we want to use it.
Yeah.
Anytime you have wood that's a bit ambiguous, and you need some other indication of the circumstance to show you that he wants to use it, it's too iffy. It's too iffy, and therefore we don't want to. Maybe even you could say that he doesn't want to paskin between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Maybe that's why he's. But if that's really the truth, then I could have. If all he's trying to do is say, I'm afraid to paskin like one or the other, I want to leave it open. Excuse the pun. I would say that he could have said, you always need it to be samuch and locked. But you don't have to have it gathered up. If you have both conditions, and you know for sure both Rabbi Yehuda will be happy and Rabbi Yossi would be happy. And yet he doesn't let you do that. He's saying, I don't care where it is, I don't care what the circumstance, it has to be piled up. So basically he took the Mishnah. It almost looks like he took the Mishnah, threw it in the garbage. The main point of this Mishnah is to tell you, yes, it has to be gathered if it's an open field, but if it's in an enclosure, you don't have to have it gathered. You can rely on just the proximity or whatever. So he's saying no. He says, I don't care. In other words, this Mishnah is making distinctions. According to Shmuel, there are no distinctions.
So even in Rabbi Yossi, if it's on the outskirts of the chum and it's locked up, it can be scattered. So it can be scattered either way.
Right.
This one or that one, doesn't it?
Right.
Every time it has to be part.
Which was the point of the Mishnah. The point of the Mishnah was it does have to be gathered if it's in an open field, but if it's in a carpet, it doesn't. But it's true. Each Tana has his own requirement. But if we paskin like one of the Tanoim, it'll make it easier. But even if you want to paskin like both and be machmer like both, you could still require it to be close and key. But Rabbi Shmuel doesn't seem to even be going for that. Shmuel seems to be more machmer than everybody. He's more machmer than even putting the both of those two opinions together. He's more machmer than both of them. Because he's saying, no, I don't care what the circumstances are. And this way, the truth of the matter is, there's only one rule according to Shmuel. No matter where the wood is, no matter what the wood is, of course it has to be within the Tichum. There's nothing to talk about if it's outside the Tichum. But once it's in the Tichum, I don't care if it's in an open field, of this kind of enclosure, that kind of enclosure, has to be piled up. You have to go Erev Yom Tov and pile it up if you really want to use it. So it makes things much simpler, but yet he's being much more machmer than the Tanoim, which is kind of a hallmark of the way things go in history, right? The earlier generations who maybe knew the halacha better were willing to be makel under certain circumstances. The later generations, for whatever reason, either the halacha is less clear to them, or just they know people are less apt to be careful, so they just make it. You make a chumrah that everyone can just remember easily.
Right.
But it certainly makes life more difficult. Because according to both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef, there was at least a number of people who don't have to make that extra effort Erev Yom Tov to go gather wood or pile up the wood. But according to Shmuel, that'll always be a requirement, unless you happen to have wood that's already piled up, perhaps. In any event, there's not even a Rashi on this, so apparently either the Gemora is going to say something significant and Rashi's waiting for that, or just it's so self-explanatory, Rosh doesn't even feel he needs to say anything. It's a chumrah, but that's what, the later Amoraim have a right to do. Okay, so let's just follow along then in the Gemora till we see where the next Rashi comes in. That was the end of his statement, right?
Hi.
Ha.
Vaha. In this,
no.
Or bet.
I think it's like but. Because the vav kind of makes it like but. Ha, but behold.
But we learned in our Mishnah, min ha-karpef, from a karpef, the fila min ha-mefuzar.
So the Gemora is asking my kasha really. Shmuel is saying something that's against the Mishnah. Because in our Mishnah it said what?
That from a karpef you can take, even if it's scattered.
Right. And here he is coming along and saying, I'm going to be firmer than the Mishnah, right? So even though I'm right that there are times when the later generations feel they have to make extra gezeras because you read a Sidoros or whatever, but the Gemara here doesn't seem to want to hold that. It could be because anyway, Shmuel is the first of the generation of Amoraim. So he's mamish, if you will, samuch mamish to the Tanoim. So it's very close to the Tanoim to say that within a few years he felt already Klal Yisrael had slipped so far that he has to make this big chumrah. The Gemara doesn't want to accept that. So then how could he go against the Mishnah? He's not coming up with a new gezerah, and how can he just go right against the Mishnah? Because the Mishnah definitely was allowing it, and why would he come along and forbid it? So the Gemara answers a chiddush. Right.
So that in our Mishnah it's from one person, or from a group of people, I guess. Personal. It's not a group halacha. It's from one.
Not the majority opinion.
Majority opinion.
It's a minority opinion, right? One particular individual who, because, let's say Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who wrote the Mishnayos, had the right to do so, right? Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is like the editor, but also he's the major posek of that time, so therefore he was allowed to write a Mishnah in such a way that it looked like the majority opinion, but it's really just a minority opinion. So even though we have two opinions in the Mishnah, we're saying, but both of them agreed you could, once it's in a karpef, at least under some condition, you could take scattered. And the Gemara is saying, but that opinion, that you could take scattered just because it's within an enclosure, that itself is a minority opinion. It sounds like one individual, but it could just mean a minority.
So he's saying it's not acceptable?
He doesn't want to go, right. In other words, if you know we know that Mishnah, what really happened when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote the Mishnayos was, let's say it's like you had this, whole table full of little plates of little salads and little things. And you go around almost like a buffet, and you take this, and you take this, and you take this, because you feel those are the choicest items. Yeah. That's really, in a certain sense, what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did. Of course, he did more than that, but one of the things he did was he had all the brises in front of him, and he picked and chose which one suited his psak. And it wasn't whimsical, it was with the das Torah of a gadol. and a posek, but on the other hand, the Gemora, in a sense, is a more omniscient body, as it were, than Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So the Gemora is seemingly all of the sages coming together and saying, we know there are other brises that he ignored when he chose these to put in his Mishnayos. There happen to be other brises which show us that there's other opinions, and actually, when it comes down to it, he chose a minority opinion for this. For whatever reason, he was allowed to because he's a posek, but still, we, as a generation that's coming after him, if we know more than that, if we know there's a majority that postulates differently, then of course we would have the right to go like the majority, and maybe even the obligation to go like the majority. In any event, that's what the Gemara claims. So of course, it's to claim it is one thing. You should normally back it up, because who says the Gemara really has the wherewithal to say that? So the Gemara says, no, we know that it's true. And now we're going to bring a proof to that. But let's just see Rashi first, and maybe perhaps Rashi will tell us a bit of information. Uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, Yechirai. So this is a minority opinion.
Right.
Rabbi Shmuel bin
Shimon.
Shimon bin El-Azhar.
El-Azhar.
Ka'amar. Lo.
Law. It.
He said it.
He's the one who said this. Okay, so apparently Rashi's, I would say, in a way, jumping the gun, because probably soon we're going to see a brisa where Reb Shimon ben Elazar is mentioned, and Rashi's just pointing out to us right off the bat that that's who we mean when we say Yichida. It's only going like his opinion. No, he said. It's like the game of telephone. He said that they said.
Oh, I see. What did they say? Okay, show
Thusly,
this is permitted.
They permitted. Who's the they?
Hillel.
Hillel. So again, according to Rashi, it's going to turn out, at least according to the supposition at this point, that if it's really true that our Mishnah is a Yichidah, it's because it's going like Reb Shimon Elazar, that his position was that Beis Shammai permitted such a thing. In other words, let's just give it a bit of substance, if we're correct, that his opinion is that Beis Hillel, who we possibly like, permitted what? Permitted thusly. This word hachi is like thusly. What do you think that means? If the wood is, remember, he's explaining our Mishnah. What do we find in our Mishnah?
That if it's locked away, if it's
in an enclosure. Let's just talk about it being in an enclosure. But not everybody required locks.
No, when I mean locked away, I mean it's
in an enclosure.
Right.
It's in an enclosure. As long as it's in an enclosure, they permit it, even if it's mefuzar. That's what it means, hachi. His opinion is that Beis Hillel did approve of that. That's why our Mishnah is saying it's okay. One way or the other, whether it has to be samuch or under a lock, okay, that's a detail. But definitely everybody agrees that an enclosure helps. Makes a difference, right? An enclosure does make a difference. Our Mishnah is making that clear. This kind of enclosure, that kind of enclosure, but an enclosure helps, right? So that's what our Gemora is about to say, that that's only according to Reb Shimon Elazar that he felt that Beis Hillel would permit such a thing. That Beis Hillel, hachi sharu, that they do permit such a thing. To go on Yom Tov and take out of a karpef, even if it's mefuzar, because the very fact that it's in a karpef makes up for the fact that it's mefuzar. Okay? And of course, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, but even if Beis Hillel permit it, but they require samuch, and maybe they require a key. Well, okay, that's a small detail within the major shita, is to say that it does make a difference. Being in an enclosure makes a difference. That's his position. That's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's position, that Beis Hillel did establish that fact, and then you have these two minor opinions. Okay, but maybe you still need it to be samuch, or you need it to be locked, whatever. But that's the major thing, that according to Shmuel, that was, I wouldn't call it tricky, but it definitely was Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's prerogative to do, to quote, as if everybody agreed on that, when it's not really true according to him. Because according to him, the next part of Rashi would hold true that what?
So according to him, Beis Hillel holds that as long as it's in an enclosure, as opposed to in an open field.
Right.
In an open field, it has to be piled up, and he's talking about mefuzah, right?
Right.
Yeah. Or piled up in an enclosure, I guess.
Well, of course. If it helps in a field, it helps in an enclosure. Nobody argues with that. The question is, do you need to do anything to the wood if it's in an enclosure? So, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar's opinion, the Beis Hillel will say, no, you don't need to do anything more. The very fact that in an enclosure helps, but you still need, maybe according to Rabbi Yehuda, one factor that it's close. According to Rabbi Yossi, a different factor that it's unlocked. But whatever it is, an enclosure helps. That very fact that he says an enclosure helps is where, according to Shmuel, somebody disagrees with that. Not everybody agrees that Beis Hillel permitted that.
And how do we know that?
That's the last part of the Rashi, by the way. And the Gemora will substantiate this. The Gemora, Rashi just sort of jumping the gun a bit and telling you in advance. Once we said it's Yechidah, Rashi's going through all what that means. But the truth is, the Gemora is going to substantiate it by bringing a Beitsa that hopefully will substantiate what he said.
Oh, so that's the next part of the Gemora.
The last part of Rashi says, according to Reb Shimon Elazar, according to Shmuel, it might be Shimon Elazar's opinion, but pligi alei, right?
And this is what the rabbis are arguing about.
And according to Shmuel, the rabbis argue on that. What do they argue on? They say that Beis Hillel did not permit you to take from an enclosure if it's scattered, no matter what.
How do we know that?
Because that's what he said before. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar told you that he believes that Beis Hillel would permit to do what? To take from an enclosure, even if it's mefuzar. With whatever details you need, that's fine. But Rashi's saying, and according to Shmuel, that's only Reb Shimon ben Elazar's opinion. But the Rabbanan argue on that. What do they argue on? They say that Beis Hillel never said that. No, Beis Hillel never permitted that. What? Are you kidding me? Beis Hillel would require an action of mechunas always, no matter where it is. Which, by the way, implies that everybody holds like Rabbi Yehuda regarding muksa. Everyone agrees you can't just say like Rabbi Shimon that it's something I could use, I didn't take my mind off of it. Maybe because, like the Gemora said at the beginning, on Yom Tov we pass like we pass like Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, everyone agrees you have to do something to take off the din of muksa. In any event, so this is now just telling us that we're going to have these people put in our face. Rashi wanted us to know before we saw the Beitsa, but now the Gemora to support Shmuel's assertion, right? Shmuel is saying it always must be piled up beforehand. You can't ever use mefuzar no matter what. And the Gemora says, but that's against the Mishnah. The Gemora says no, because he holds the Mishnah is a das yachid. He holds the Mishnah is only one man's opinion. And Rashi sort of widened that to be one man's opinion about what Beis Hillel said. But the Rabbanan hold that Beis Hillel did not say that. And that's what Shmuel is banking on. How did Shmuel even know there was Machlokas Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon and Elazar regarding Beis Hillel, regarding the Mefuzar?
It's a Beitsa.
Yeah, Desanya. And Elazar, there he is, what Rashi promised us.
Lo nichlaku Beit Shammai v'Beit Hillel ala mafuzar basadot.
Oh.
So they're not.
They never argued.
They're not arguing about scattered wood in the field.
And what don't they argue? That. Period.
So
they don't argue about that. Everyone agrees it's asur. If it's in an open field, according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, everybody, B'Shaim B'Sil, everybody agree you can't touch it. But they also agree, Mechunasim,
Sheba Karpev, and they gathered or powder put in a carpet in a
enclosure, Mevim, no, Shemevim.
You can bring.
So that's the second thing they agree on. Everybody, B'Shaim B'Sil, both agree according to him that if it's in an enclosure, then it can be scattered as well. I'm sorry. No, that if it's gathered and it's in an enclosure, then you could take it. So we went to two extremes so far. If it's scattered in an open field, that's like the worst of the worst case scenario, scattered and open field, everyone agrees it's asur. If it's the best of the best, it's piled up and in a carpet, it has 2 milas piled up and a carpet, then everyone agrees you could take it. So we went to the two extremes.
So what about scattered in the carpet?
But
what are they arguing about?
right.
Oh, Hamafuzarim.
That's one thing he says, and that's something we never thought about. The Al Shibasato. Right?
And they're about powder put in there, so they're arguing about.
Where you have a middle. Any of the middle categories where you don't have two qualities, let's say, in your favor, you only have one quality in your favor. Either it's in an enclosure but it's scattered, or it's in an open field but it's gathered. So then you have at least one thing in your favor when you have only one. So when you have two things in your favor, everyone agrees you could take it. When you're missing both of those things, everyone agrees you can't take it. So we're saying, but
why would they be arguing about this?
what?
If it's in a field and gathered, or if it's in a car park and it's scattered.
Again, if you have two factors in your favor,
yeah,
then everyone agrees it's okay. If you're missing both of those factors, everyone agrees it's not okay.
Right.
The only gray area is where only have one good factor, but you're missing the other good factor.
But both of these are good factors.
What both of these?
The fact that you got a car park is already a good factor, no?
Yeah, but you're missing. You're missing the mechunas, the mefuza. So it only has one good factor. That's what he's saying. When do they argue? When there's only one good factor in your favor, supporting the fact that you want to use it, so to speak, then is that enough?
Previously we said that if it's in a car park next to Sivuch,
again,
it doesn't have to be bothered.
Yes, because that might be going according to Beis Hillel. He's looking at it now from a larger point of view. There's Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. He wants to talk about Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel now. And the way Rashi explained it before, that mission was only talking about Beis Hillel anyways. Because that's all we really have to be concerned about in the halacha. So the Mishnah, whoever wrote the Mishnah, chose to focus on Beis Hillel's opinion, and the only thing the Mishnah wanted to tell you is that within Beis Hillel there's a machlokas, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Basically, how to get to the heter of Beis Hillel. So that's what our Mishnah wanted to show you. So they didn't get into Beis Shammai for some reason in our Mishnah. Maybe they didn't want to complicate matters. But this Beitsa is ignoring that local machlokus, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, and just focusing on the more macro machlokus of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So he's saying, there's a famous machlokus, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. This is where the machlokus is. When you either have mefuzar in a karpef or mechunas in a sadeh. There's a machlokus Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Whereas our Mishnah was focusing on Beis Hillel and saying, remember Beis Hillel who let you get away with karpef even if it's mefuzar and etc.? Well, we want to tell you about that because it's a machlokus Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. When was Beis Hillel actually going to be mekel on that? So that's what our Mishnah chose to focus on. And our Gemora is saying that that's only Rebbe Elazar ben Reb Shimon's opinion of Beis Hillel, but in any event, our Mishnah is only going with Beis Hillel. Whereas this Bryce is now sort of opening everything up and saying, let's be honest, there's a machlokus Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That's very often what a Mishnah or a Bryce would want to focus on, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the more major machlokus within Klal Yisrael, so to speak. Because Beis Shammai actually were the majority at one point. So that's what he's starting out with. There's a famous machlokus of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, and when can you gather in the wood on Yom Tov? How many factors do you have to have in your favor to do it? So he starts out first of all where they don't argue, and he takes the two extremes, and then he shows you, but the only place they do argue is somewhere in the middle. The middle being where you only have one of the two factors. Okay, we'll have to stop here.